I want you all to imagine this scenario. It's the middle of the night, you're asleep, when suddenly you hear this sound. You hear the beeping of your smoke alarm. You get up, you look, your house is filled with smoke. You get outside, you hear the sounds of sirens and flashing lights. Who's it that responded? Well, if you're like the majority of Americans, you will have been responded by volunteer firefighters. And now, at my survey, I had seen that actually there have been a couple of people who have experienced a fire in their home. And so they may have actually had an experience where they've dealt with a volunteer firefighter. To start with some basics, a volunteer firefighter is simply a firefighter who is not paid for their work. They're not paid to go onto the calls. They're not paid to go around the station and do what needs to be done there. They're just regular people who may have full-time or part-time jobs in order to support themselves, and they volunteer to help their communities. Now, I want to get into some also background statistics. So I turned to the National Fire Protection Association, also known as the NFPA, where I found that there are approximately 1,160,450 total firefighters. That includes both paid and volunteer firefighters as of 2015. Of them, they belong to 58,150 fire stations, and of those 1 million plus firefighters, approximately 814,850, or about 70% of them, are volunteers. In 2015, they had responded to a total of about approximately 33,635,500 calls. Of that, 21.5 million were medical calls. That includes things like heart attacks, or as recently, because of the things like the opiate epidemic, a lot of them have also been overdoses and things like that, of that nature. 2,556,500 of those, of all calls, were false alarms. 1,345,500 calls were actual fires, and of those, 365,500 of those were residential fires, such as your homes or your apartments. The remaining calls were classified as other, such as hazmat or hazardous materials, things like chemical spills, or dangerous situations such as wires on the floor, wires on the ground. Now that I've gone over some stats, I go back to the 1600s, the beginning of firefighting in America. Now, since the beginning of the colonization in America, there's always been fires, and so there's always been a need to respond to and fight these fires. According to the New York City Fire Museum, one of the first fire brigades in these colonies was in New Amsterdam, which is now in Lower Manhattan in New York City. In 1648, the then governor of New Amsterdam had appointed 4 men to serve as fire wardens. They would go out and patrol the colony in order to check the homes, inspect them, to make sure to prevent as many fires as they possibly could. In addition, there was a law requiring all residents of the city to put out at least 3 buckets of water every night in order to fight fires if necessary. Now, moving on to the early part of the early United States, we'll go on to Philadelphia. In my survey, I asked if anyone knew who had founded the first fire company in Philadelphia. I found out that not many actually did know, and so I just wanted to go over that with you. The first fire company in Philadelphia was Union Fire Company, founded in 1731 by Benjamin Franklin. And now, according to PBS's article, Citizen Ben, which detailed his life, Franklin had, quote, suggested Philadelphia should have firefighting clubs modeled after the ones in Boston. The members of these clubs were just regular citizens who would meet and would protect their own homes and businesses. They would supply their own buckets to fight the fires. They would supply bags to take items out of the fires, because back then, unlike now, these fires were more likely to be slow-burning fires where you could actually bring things out of the house, unlike modern fires where there's no time to bring anything out. They would also stand guard outside of these buildings after a fire to protect them from looters. Not only did these fire brigades serve as fire defense and fire response, they would also serve as social clubs, much like Masons or Elks clubs. Now, a difference between these firefighting clubs in the U.S. and in other countries like England at the time, according to Jackson Landers in the Smithsonian Magazine, was that unlike in England, where firefighters were paid by insurance companies that homeowners would pay, and firefighters would only respond to these addresses, otherwise they would let them burn. In the US, we had a grassroots kind of community where they would form bucket brigades, where if one house in the community were to, say, catch fire, everyone in the community would come together to put out this fire. However, not everything was cooperative for these fire brigades in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. According to Landers, sometimes there were rival companies, and these companies would sometimes get into fights. They would actually go out in front of a blaze and sometimes actually just fight each other instead of fighting the fires. Because as these brigades were usually neighborhoods coming together, there were rival neighborhoods, and so there were rival firefighters. And so because of that, these rivalries in the neighborhoods would spill out during these firefighting operations. Now, to come back to modern times, a little bit about fire prevention. Most people in the survey had no idea when National Fire Prevention Week is. And now, according to the NFPA, National Fire Prevention Week is, quote, from the week from Sunday to Saturday where October 9th falls. Now, this October 9th date has significance as it is the anniversary of the Great Chicago Fire, which occurred in 1871 and killed over 250 people in Chicago. That's the famous fire where the myth started that it was Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over the lantern.
Poor cow.
And now, Fire Prevention Week has been observed annually through the NFPA since 1922. And it's actually been observed by the President of the United States annually since 1925. During these fire prevention weeks, fire companies will often go to local schools, elementary schools, and preschools, and they'll talk about fire prevention and fire safety. They'll go out, they'll dress up in their full turnout gear, and they'll show the kids what a firefighter looks like, because one of the biggest issues is making sure, if they are ever in a fire, do not be afraid of the person who's in this gear. They are here to help. Additionally, they will be holding open houses, which are free to the public, and the public can actually go in, meet the firefighters, and see what the station looks like. This is also to help the fire companies kind of keep together their sense of community. At these open houses, there usually are a lot of vendors. A lot of these vendors actually do have employees who are volunteer firefighters. In addition to those, there are also firefighting competition. Sometimes you'll see them doing a car rescue where they'll take a junked car and they'll take apart everything. They'll take off the roof, they'll take off the doors in order to compete against other stations and see that. Or they'll have different competitions, such as how fast each relay can go for each firefighting situation, cutting a roof, hoisting, climbing ladders, climbing a rope, hoisting hoses, and the like. In conclusion of that, volunteer firefighters have been around in many different capacities since the inception of the United States. They've had a major impact in trying to both protect and save properties, your homes, as well as saving lives. They've also had a major impact in trying to prevent these fires by stopping them before they start through proper fire safety education.